Hello and welcome to another weekly update. Welcome to the start of another week. Some interesting things to talk about this week. And it's also another reminder, if we didn't need one already, that spring is coming, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, and that conference season is coming as well. We've just come off the back of Enterprise Connect. Wasn't there, but it was fun to see the announcements and to see some of the social media stuff. Looked like it was a good catching up and networking had by all, which was nice. And lots of good energy. So that is a good omen, I think, of our sector, being in a good place, because it's been a tough couple of months. It's been a tough start to the year for lots and lots of people. In our sector, there've been job cuts across the board. There've been tightenings of all sorts of budgets and stuff. And so it's nice to go somewhere and see some positivity, and hopefully we'll see more of that return throughout the year. One thing that I thought was interesting was the first thing to talk about this week, which is actually a new code sample around Microsoft Teams and Outlook. I think last week I talked about the ability for the Teams toolkit now to support Outlook add-ins. And now we have a Hello World that does exactly that. It's a bit of an odd one, this Hello World, so I do want to talk you through it. So here's the blog post about it by Rabia, and it's very much a how-to. It's a really nice, it's a well put together blog post in terms of instructions to follow to do this yourself. And it uses the Teams Toolkit pre-release version that we talked about, and it creates a Hello World app. And the app it creates in Teams Toolkit is for a Teams tab and Outlook add-in. So it's both together in a sample. And then Rabia goes through how to how to sort of F5 it and see it working in Teams, and also how to see it working in Outlook. Now, you might ask yourself, as I did, why would anybody want a Hello World sample that worked in both a Teams tab and an Outlook add-in? Surely you'd have separate samples for both. And the answer, I think, probably is conference demos. My guess would be, I don't know, this might be an unfair judgment. My guess would be that this is being prepped in, this is being created in readiness for some demo at some conference. I mean, build is coming up. Or it was created for Enterprise Connect and I just didn't see it because I wasn't at Enterprise Connect, and I don't think very much of any of Enterprise Connect was live streamed or available on demand or anything like that. So maybe it's already been used, maybe it's coming up, I don't know. But that was the immediate thought I had when I saw this. I think it is still useful. So do check it out, because it's good to look through the source code and see how stuff is done. But if you wanted an app that had both a Teams app built into it and an Outlook add-in as two separate things into one Hello World application, well, now you have one, because there's now a sample app for it. So go check that out if that sounds interesting to you. But I thought it was interesting more actually as a kind of indicator of conferences are coming than of anything else. All right, let's talk about something else. And we've got another update to the Microsoft Graph Developer Proxy. So I've talked about this several times before, the Microsoft Graph Developer Proxy, really useful tool for developers building anything on Microsoft Graph, because it allows you to test out and simulate things like throttling, outages, slowness, weird errors that Microsoft Graph gives sometimes. And there's an updated version of this now that comes with some extra stuff. It comes with some rate limiting support, which is very useful. And you can specify your own rate limits as well. And the proxy will kind of do a sort of realistic job, if you like, of giving you those headers. So you can perform your own back off. You can read those headers and back off with them. And then it will also be realistic in forcibly failing your requests if you do ignore those limits. So I thought that was really good. And they've also added more guidance around paging and around using OData sort of paging requests to make sure, really to kind of coach good behavior. And this is interesting because from what I see, and I don't know because I don't talk to that team very much, but it feels like they're really looking at all the ways, all the support calls they get, all the ways in which developers say that Microsoft Graph is a pain point, and all the time they have to spend on support tickets, and they're trying to build that back into the proxy to kind of educate us on the things that commonly go wrong. So I think that's really good. There's a bunch of other improvements as well here. This one is interesting. It will, they've built a plugin that you can use that will automatically add a client request ID header. Now that's the thing that their support teams ask for all the time. So this is kind of helpful if you end if you end up having a support ticket you need to raise with Microsoft, you'll be able to give them your client request ID header, and that will help. And it will helps you as well, give you an ID that you can use for tracing and traceability all the way through your application. So do check this out. There's a new version, it's 0.6. Yeah, it's really good. It's definitely like if you're writing against Microsoft Graph, I know I've said this before, but if you're writing against Microsoft Graph, you do want to check this out. See what's happening with your application, because it will save you a bunch of time, either in the development cycle or if you completely ignore it and ignore things like throttling and rate limiting and the slightly, decentralized, decoupled, sometimes it works. Often it works, sometimes it doesn't. Nature of, making asynchronous requests across the internet, across HTTPS, where there's so many things that could go wrong, and you don't implement retry and all those sort of things. Either, you can spend a lot of time doing that in development, or you'll spend a lot of time doing it in support once your product goes live. And so the developer proxy can help you solve those problems in development rather than in live. And that's probably a good thing. Let's talk about something else, something very on brand, which is gaining insights from customer interactions using Azure Communication Services and Azure OpenAI. This is an interesting little sample that I thought was useful, and all the code for this is on GitHub. But the basic premise is, let's say you've got some kind of customer chat thing going on that you're using Azure Communication Services to host. So that's the chat experience between your agents and your customers, and you want to get the sentiment of that, and you want to get a nice sort of summary, like a nice short summary of the whole conversation and the sentiment. That's something you could use OpenAI for. That's a good idea. And so this is a sort of little project that goes through proof of concepting that. And you could use this with anything. Like, it doesn't have to be Azure Communication Services. The basic premise is you've got a transcript. And so you're just going to get a summary of that transcript and the sentiment from your OpenAI service, and use it. And that's kind of basically all that this application is. You can, if we go down a little bit, you'll be able to see, let's have a look. This is just kind of the chat process. And then here, this is what you get back. You can see here, there's the agent text and the customer text. It's weirdly split out into two different arrays, but I mean, maybe it's like this, maybe it's not. I think, to be honest, you'd probably want to go like you when you get a transcript, depending on how your code works, but like I would imagine a transcript that kind of is more linear. But either way, I mean, I think this is how this is happening in the end. And then the whole thing is being fed into OpenAI, and you'll get a summary at the end here, a bit like this. That's kind of 4 lines, including the sentiment, that just kind of wraps up a nice summary of what the conversation is. You could do this today. This is not anything kind of groundbreaking as such. It's nothing that is specific to, ChatGPT particularly, or OpenAI particularly. You could do this with cognitive services before. I'm not trying to pretend it's anything magical. It isn't. This is more of a concrete use case for using OpenAI today. And I think we could do with more concrete use cases of using some of this new technology at the moment when we're on this kind of hype cycle. So I think stuff like this is useful to be like, here's a concrete example of something you could do today to put into your applications that you have running today and give them some value that they didn't have before. If you need, do you need a summary of the conversation? Do you need to know the sentiment? Are you going to do something interesting and useful with that? If you're not, don't worry about it. Don't throw it in there just for the sake of it. But if you genuinely, if this is a problem that you're trying to solve today, maybe this can help. So all of the code is in GitHub. I'll put a link to this blog post where you can go through the steps. Don't be put off by the fact that if it's not your particular language, they're doing it in Python. But to be honest, you can read through this and you can get the general gist. And like I say, it's not a specific problem they're solving. This is, I've got a transcript, I want to get a summary, and using OpenAI to do that, really. Finally, there's one kind of slight curveball I want to throw at you, just in case, like me, it immediately resonated. This was just really good timing that this came up, because I'm in the process of moving things around different machines. And just this morning, I was thinking, gosh, I've got a lot of GitHub projects, and every time I do a little, project, I end up with quite a lot of different GitHub projects, like a lot of different GitHub repos, because I tend to break my solutions into different projects, and each project tends to have its own repo, and my naming conventions could be better. And so GitHub repository sprawl is a thing that crossed my mind like yesterday and this morning of, oh, I wonder if I'll come to regret these decisions, and do I worry about this? Is everybody's GitHub a bit of a mess, and should I be doing better? Anyway, Ben Day, whose blog I follow, I don't often post a lot of his posts because they're not immediately relevant sometimes, but they're kind of good information to have. And this is one of those, actually. It's around managing your Git repository sprawl. He's actually written an application called GitRepoSync, which is kind of cool. And it actually really struck a chord with me as I'm moving around different machines, trying to figure out which repositories I need to clone, and finding that for a given solution, I might have 10 or 12 different projects. That's a lot of cloning. That's a lot of messing around. And so let me share this blog post with you. It's this little application. This is exactly the problem I was facing. And he wrote this little utility, which is kind of interesting. And you give it a configuration, and it kind of does a lot of stuff for you, which I thought was cool. Like, it'll just kind of sync up all these. It'll read the config, and then just add a bunch. You can add multiple repositories, and it will look at if you've got a lot of repositories on your disk already, it will figure out what they all are, put them in a big CSV for you. You can look at it. You can manually. It's all CSV files, so you can then sort of manually check it and put it back into your config file, which I thought was really cool. Nice little tool, very handy. So thanks to Ben for making all that available to everyone, because I think it's a cool idea. So I'm going to try this, I think, and see how it goes. All right, I think that's everything I wanted to tell you about this week. Have a good week, whatever you're doing. What's my week looking like? Not quite sure. I've got an interesting podcast that I'm going to be recording for that I'll tell you about as soon as it's live. And it's not that long until Comms v Next now. So that's going to be brilliant when it comes. Very excited for that. Lots of other things happening, I'm sure. But have a great week, whatever it is you're doing. And I will speak to you again next time.